Pretty
I'm going to
much.
nickname one of my kids Cobalt, and they're going to be like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm like, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. It's all good. Perfectly fine.
You're still making money.
Is
That's
that
right,
the one that
exactly.
never leaves the house?
I like that one. That's pretty good. That was pretty good. Yeah, it's a 60-year-old living in the basement. Literally, because that's where Kobo lives. More often than not, where the mainframe's at, right? So,
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next installment of Azure Cloud Talk. I'm one of your co-hosts, Alec Harrison, here with co-host Brian and our special guest, Javier Lozano, founder, CEO of Lozano Tech, .NetConf, and Not a Diva, as he said
not
in
a
our
diva.
intro.
That is correct. Hashtag not a diva.
That's awesome.
So I do have to, just because it's really relevant, we postponed this about a week because Javier went down to see the Cyclones in the Big 12 playoff game, wearing an Iowa State hat. Awesome. How was that experience?
It was very enlightening. So I view it as there's the journey down there. There is the hotel stay.
Yeah.
And then there is the actual the game, right?
Mhm.
So it was well, we're all from the Midwest. So a 10-hour drive is like, oh, it's only a 10-hour drive.
Right.
Right? Where we do not like, oh my gosh, the world's gonna end, right? So we drove it down. It was a lot of fun because it was a boys' trip. It was my first boys' trip with my kids.
Yeah.
So I have a freshman at Iowa State. He's starting to be electrical engineer. I have a sophomore, and it was me. My youngest didn't want had some soccer stuff. He didn't want to miss it, so he opted not to do that. So we divided the drive, completely uneven because that's just the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
So I drove to Kansas City. So it was for us, from Des Moines. Des Moines is in Iowa for those of if they're right in the smack center of it. For those of you that know, so from Des Moines to Kansas City is 3 hours and change. And then my sophomore took all the way to Wichita, and then my college freshman took it from Wichita to north of Oklahoma City. And then I took it to Dallas. So I drove 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
They drove 4, just because there's a bunch of construction in north of Oklahoma City. Driving in Dallas is nuts because people don't know how to drive in Dallas. And Kansas City was also pretty nuts because of just the way you have to cut through the city to get onto I-35. So it was fun to getting down there. It was a long drive, but having that split with the drivers made the huge difference, right? We lost because we showed up for the first quarter, and after that we started like, let's not play football anymore. Let's just kind of give the ball to the other team so they can score points on us. That's essentially what happened.
Right.
But visiting AT&T Stadium was nuts. Oh my gosh, that thing is massive. It's like 4 stories. Like it takes you forever to go from one side of the stadium to the other, even inside, because what they did is so imagine it's the shape like a football, like semicircle like that. Everything inside here, and for the 3 stories, is VIP. So you cannot just go like you would think, oh, let me just do a loop.
Sure.
You can't. You have to go all the way to the 4th floor. And that's the open area. But the first floor, second floor, and third floor are completely blocked off.
Nice.
So we were on the first floor in this side of the circle. We want to go to the other side because that's where our seats are. Okay, we'll go up 4 flights of stairs, cut across, and then come down 4 flights of stairs to go to your seats. So again, it's massive. That I was just impressed. But the nice thing about it, there's really not a bad seat in the place, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's my rant about, and then obviously.
Did you already have your tickets before you got to Texas?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay.
So my son, it was literally, it all came together that week. Mm-hmm. So we, so how the Cyclones got to play in the Big 12 championship is that we needed a team to lose, which is always the right way of going into a championship.
Right.
So we won the weekend before, right? And the game that we needed the team to lose was right afterwards. My son was like, "Hey, this is great. I'm going to see," because he has season tickets for all the sports, because he the way Iowa State does it now. And, Brian and I went to Iowa State. Actually, Brian and I graduated from both the computer science
We had
department.
We had a couple classes together.
We had a couple classes together, so I've known Brian forever.
Yeah,
for more than he cares to acknowledge.
No, it's I always, sorry, I'm going to interrupt your story because it's relevant right now at this moment. But I always tell my students that, like, I feel like the dumb kid in the room. I always felt like the dumb kid in the room, and there's always this other guy that was like the smartest kid in the room, and that's you.
You're too kind, and I've told you this. Stop saying that. You're smarter than me in some things, and I'm smarter than you in some things, and we balance out. We balance out.
We had a lot of
what
fun
you can
in
do.
Comp 311 with Dr. Ja, right?
Yes, that.
Oh my goodness,
gosh.
Data Structures and Algorithms, the dreaded big giant. What was that? It was that white book. I posted it on Twitter last year because it was like, it's still available.
Yeah, I actually got rid of that book a year or two ago.
Nice.
Just because I didn't have all the, it's a hot mess back here. That's my bookshelves and everything else. So I kept some of them. And honestly, I have my 330 book up there.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a 20-something-year-old book from, and that was discrete mathematics and proofs and things like that. Like literally, you're proving how you can essentially write a parser, right? So a lexer and those sort of things, which is pretty nuts that it's all based in math, right? You're not writing those mathematical equations when you're creating it, but all of that stuff allows you to say, hey, if we could do it this way, here's the way you potentially do it. You could write something like this, a computer program to do that, right?
Yeah.
But I got rid of that algorithms book 2 years ago. And I gifted it to a friend. It was like, oh my gosh, I've heard about this book and everything. It was like, and here's my gift to you. I haven't opened it in 20 years. Chances are that I could keep this for another 20 years and not open it.
The worst part is it's still relevant.
It is crazy irrelevant.
Yeah. It's like the only thing that withholds the test of time is algorithm and data structure theory.
Yeah, totally. So. And that and COM. Because one of the other books that I got up there is .NET and COM Interop. That thing is probably 2002, because it was like, obviously back in the day. So for those of you who don't know,
VB6.
VB6 was huge. MFC, Microsoft Foundation classes, ATL, all these C++ things, right? And COM, so component object model, is pretty much the thing that makes Windows, right? It's what makes it all happening. And if you did anything with VB6 or the Visual Basic 6, actually Visual Basic in general, whether it be 6, first to 6, the COM, primarily iDispatch and IUnknown, made VB6 possible, because it's just the way that the system works, right? Well, all of that gut and the way VB6 work is what made .NET possible, right? Along with the CLR and everything else. That's all cool, but at the end of the day, it still needs to connect with the operating system and do those things. So if you wanted to call, like, for example, in Windows forms development, right? When you have a form equals this, that title, all of that is actually making dispatch calls to the underlying operating system to do those calls. And it's all via COM interop. So it's pretty neat, some of the stuff that you can do with .NET. And I'm just sharing that because I really geeked out in .NET when it first came out. And which is cool because I know all the foundations about it. I know why. Oh, I can tell you why that happens. And you may not care, but
just give me something that works, Javier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's true, but just welcome to the evolution of things, right? Because back then we cared that it did it this way because it needed to do it this way across that server and this server, right? Or this and that, right? Nowadays, like, just put it on Docker and Docker will figure it out. It's like, how does Docker work? I don't know. It's puppies and rainbows. It's like, we don't know. It's like, but all of it is relevant. And we, sometimes we don't take the time to learn it. And again, I'm sounding like the old guy. I'm talking about 20 years and things like that, right? But it's difficult. Get me as I get busier by driving my kids to Texas or whatever those things are. I too suffer from like, you know what? I'll have a book and I'll read it later, and I don't.
Yeah,
because life happens because I'm busy, right?
right.
But when I do try to learn, I try to learning by building it and literally breaking it, right? And then the moment I break it, I'm like, wait, I thought it was supposed to do X. I was like, oh no, it's doing it this other way. Got it. Then I just make that mental note. So, but anyway, that's a complete rant on that aspect of things.
I think it's a great way to learn though. Like the documentation sometimes, which I think is an underrated skill, right? Of just being able to read and interpret documentation. Sometimes it's not right. Like it might be written for a very specific use case. And as soon as you go outside the pasture, it's like, hey, I can't just copy and paste what I'm going to blame Microsoft just because like that's where I play. But it's this way with pretty much any documentation of a product that iterates relatively quickly.
You mean this recipe tutorial doesn't work the way I'm going to need to do the thing I need to do in the real world?
Yeah, I'm going to shake my fist at Bob Smith, who posted it 4 years ago for not keeping it up to date now.
But how dare you not to do this for free for me?
Right.
Yeah. So I was dealing with some of that just yesterday even.
Well, it's funny, Brian, because remember, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago when I attended your Azure class? Like, remember you were working with that, and which is great, by the way. I learned. I wanted to try it out because I've never done it because it was mostly on the road. Like, okay, I'm figuring out Azure back when back when it was Windows Azure, right? Before even they got rebranded and
have the special SDK in order to develop against Azure.
Totally. Well, and to think about it, remember when the UI was all Silverlight?
Yeah.
And it was painful. Like I remember deploying to clouds. Remember cloud services?
No, because I avoided it.
Oh, good
Lord! I stopped playing with Azure like when it was new until it was probably. I didn't use it for the first 3 or 4 years at all. I'm like, nope, I'm not going to mess with this because I was afraid of losing money because it was like you had to pay money just to learn it at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
And so when they made it free to learn, that changed my whole tune on it.
Yep. And I will give what credit is due. And Scott Guthrie moved mountains to make Azure what it is now.
It's awesome
because of the way it started it. And I can't share some of the information the stories that I know and stuff like that, but it's from where it was to where it is now. The goo is the man for it, right? So wonderful person, wonderful individual, and drove the culture the right way. But if I'm going to pick on Azure, cloud services was the bane of your existence, was one of those things that you never did it. And the reason why it was is because just the way it was implemented, right? It was implemented from the perspective. Are you familiar with cloud services, Alec, or was this before? Were you still in middle school when that was still happening? I'm joking because you're younger than us, right?
He's much younger.
I was going to make the joke when you guys were reading a technical book in 2002. I think I was 6. So
yeah, there you go. But you're probably true. Hashtag facts. Again, Jeepers. Not a diva. Just an old bitter guy.
Just been around. It's like that when Bill Murray says, "I'm not God. I've just been around for a long time."
Yeah,
maybe God just was around all the time, a long time.
Totally. There's a saying in Spanish that goes, "El diablo sabe más por viejo que por diablo," which translates to the devil knows more because it's old than that it's because it's the devil. Right. So it's like just the longer you've been around, the more you see how things will fail or succeed. Right. And you can see the pattern. You can see the pattern and how everything happens. So, but cloud services, a little side note for all of you who just are new to Azure or have been working with Azure, is like that was the promise, right? And it was implemented too puristically for Azure. So the core infrastructure of Azure from back in the day was called Red Dog. And there's an entire inappropriate story that I've heard why it was called Red Dog, and we're just going to leave it at Red Dog. So the platform was called Red Dog, and the whole purpose of it, and all of it came from, oh my gosh, Werner Vogels, I'm probably butcher his name, who is the CTO of AWS. So he's a PhD, he has his doctorate, and he came up with a really, his thesis is nuts, is this thing that AWS was built on. It's all these things that are built on, right? So how do you do this at scale? How do you do the automation? I highly recommend you read the thesis. It's is nuts for what it was. I read it forever ago. And the cool part about it was that the premise was awesome, right? Because like, hey, this cloud service, which essentially I'm going to deploy an ASP.NET application, right? I'm going to bundle everything together and I'm going to deploy it. And this is going to be completely created from nothing. And Red Dog enabled that. So when you would say, hey, I need to take this application, deploy it out to the cloud, it would take 30 minutes. It would take 30 minutes because it will tell Red Dog, it's like, oh, by the way, I need you to set up the network. Setting up network. I need to just spin up this disk and this virtual machine and this and that. And literally it will just assemble like a transformer, put all the pieces together, scale. By the way, here's your app. Deploy it. Well, the fun part was like, oh, dang it, I mistyped something. There's a typo. Red Dog will take all of that, destroy it, and do it again every single time. And it was painful, right? Because it was just like, okay, this is supposed to be the cloud. This is supposed to be that. But it was purest to the form of like, look, we can create all the stuff. We can automate all these things, right? And it just took forever, right? So a lot of people were like, well, why do we want to drink from this Azure fire hose, right? If it takes that long just to deploy a simple application. But it was magical compared to, because they showed, here's the automations you can do for networking and everything else. So it was the right step for Microsoft to sort of start that route. And then I forgot the name of the new engine. Oh my gosh. I want to say, it starts with A. I want to say Atlas, but I could be wrong on that. And I'm using code names that only internal Microsoft people knew about it, but they're just code names like Windows used to be called Memphis and Chicago. All right. Just welcome to code names, right? Puppies. It doesn't matter, right? But that was the thing that enabled apps, Azure websites, which tends to be branded to app services. All the automations for the platform in storage, queues, all those things ended up being reworked into that new thing. And eventually Red Dog was sunset. I'm sure there's still something there with Red Dog that potentially could still be running it because it's a massive endeavor. But it's just, cool to see what it was to what it is now, right? For the longest time, I actually started with the cloud. I started with AWS, but I hated AWS from the perspective that I had to do everything myself.
Yeah.
Right. Because I just care about the application. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that with AWS. And there's power with that, but it's also like, oh, I gotta go.
It's the total paradigm of a Windows developer. We don't want to trinket with stuff. We just want to be able to plug and play. We want convention over configuration versus a Java developer who wants to be in the POM XML all day long and wants to configure this thing and that thing. And there's just a different mindset. And that's Amazon versus Azure in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, but even then, like, let's go 10, because 10 years ago, 15 years ago or so, when I was thinking with some of this stuff, it was more like, oh my gosh, I'm going to bleed money because I have to run especially for .NET, right? An ASP.NET application on a virtual machine running as an EC2 instance. Because EC2 has been around since the dawn of time, right? And it's an EC2 instance, and they're like, rats, how much is this thing going to cost me? Well, now I need SQL Server. I was like, oh my Lord, this is just like making it rain, right? So that's why it was popular to do, to like, oh yeah, do it in other languages, do it on Ruby on Rails, right? Or do it on this and PHP, because you were running on Linux, right? You were running on something else that didn't have that hefty price, and you were paying for it because you couldn't deploy your licensing on there, right? Obviously, we're talking about 15 years. A lot of stuff happened in 15 years, right? And even Azure has gone to like, hey, choose your own adventure, right? You can, if you want to customize everything, you can. If you want to create your own different IP ranges and all those things. So I think they both sort of did this, like every technology and every platform, they kind of found their crossways. And I'm a firm believer that if you can do it in one, you can do it in the other one, right? In A or B. Might be easier in one than the other, but it's the same thing as like, oh, C# is better for X rather than COBOL, right? Rather than Visual Basic, rather than Python, right? It's just a tool, right? But if you can do it in one tool, you can do it in any other tool. It's just, what's your preference?
Right. It really does come down to preference.
Right. 100%.
When you say easier might be based on your preference, honestly.
I agree. In context too, right? Absolute context, right? And I think, more often than not, my experience has been that, it may be same for you two gents, is that more often than not, people focus on like, well, we're going to use Dynamo because Dynamo's got this thing, or we're going to use Lambdas or functions or this. And I'm like, what's the actual architecture that we're trying to do? What's the application supposed to do? Let's not throw a service name until we know what the thing is.
Yeah.
Right. Let's start with the business case. And again, maybe that's just because I'm the old guy now. All right. Let's start with the business case. Let's figure out what are those requirements are. And then we will figure out, it's like, oh, we need a database. Or we need to store data. What kind of data? How does the data need to be stored? Oh, okay. It could be Aurora. It could be Dynamo. It could be SQL database. It could be table storage, right? And then you add the services in rather than just kind of dragging and dropping a bunch of things, because more often than not, that's what the certification taught you.
Right.
But the certification taught you to look only inside that box.
Right? Certification or connect somebody who's promoting the newfangled thing that everybody should be on. And so you heard a keyword, or your boss heard a keyword, and probably, Javi, you and I have been burned so many times at this point. We're just like, can we not move so fast on that and just think about it before we go put, all this investment into developing for this thing and then realizing that we didn't need it the whole time?
Right. Well, and the thing about it, and first of all, there's nothing wrong with against certification, because I took a certification class from you, Brian, right? So it's not necessarily anything that if you have no knowledge on it, then starting with that way is great, but understand that you're looking at it from this perspective, right? You're looking at from what that thing is. HashiCorp has a certification. If you want to be certified in Terraform, you can get a nice little shiny badge on it that says, look, I'm a Terraform expert, right? And again, nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that you could do that. I had certified Scrum Master, and I had a certified product owner certifications. And the reason why I did it was because as a consultant was more like, hey, look, I have the same 3-letter things as the people that work for you. My job is not to be your Scrum Master or your product owner. My job is to get your teams to be working with the Scrum Master and the product owner. So I can speak that language. Right. So let's figure out, how do we make your team more efficient with that, rather than, oh, look, well, is it the Kanban? Are you starting as a user? It's like, doesn't matter. Right. It's like, are you getting the stuff you need to get done in your sprint? If the answer is no, then we got issues. And more often than not, and the issues tend to be more technical than anything else, because that's what you're building. You're building a technical solution.
Well, you told me that I couldn't estimate more than 3 points, and I knew it was a 5-point story, but you wouldn't let me have more than 3 points. So it's your fault.
That's right. But why are you using points where we could be using t-shirt sizes? And I'm like, oh, nobody cares. Are you getting the thing you're supposed to get done?
Right.
So again, people do care. And again, I don't know who's going to watch this, so it's not like I'm talking Scrum or anything. I love it. I love agility. But I like agility little a, not agility big A.
Yeah.
With TM on it.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me still of, I think it was the CTO of like the Navy or something got capital A Agile training, or he did a memo that basically said that, hey, this doesn't work. It's not Agile. I believe it's bad. And he said, it was like the Scrum Master Association, or whoever sells big A Agile. It's like, hey, we'll offer you free training or whatever. Safe. Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Safe Agile. He's like, it just doesn't work for the Navy. It's not agile. There's not enough agility there, not enough flexibility. We can't make it work. And if anybody proves me wrong, I'll take this memo down. And Safe put them through a 6-month training of Safe Agile. The memo's still up. You can Google it and look it up today. So, I mean, I think that kind of just says what it is. And it was basically, in the Navy, we're doing really unique things. We need flexibility, and adhering to a doctrine of, capital A Agile or safe is just too rigid, because we need more flexibility. We need to do what Agile was truly made for, in my opinion, and less than just prescriptive doctrine that we're, hey, do this or else.
Well, it's funny because, give me 1 second. Hold on. I just sent you all a link to this classic John Referee and Jeffries article from 2006. I love it because it's got the date right there where it says, we tried baseball and it didn't work. And it's an allegory post where Ron Jeffries is saying, it's like, oh, by the way, baseball being agile, we looked at it and we shouldn't have 9 players. We found the optimal number is X. Right. So they're saying we're doing baseball, but we're doing it this way. No, you're not doing baseball. Right. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, we're doing agile and we're doing it this way. It was like, you're not doing agile. Right. And again, when I'm saying this, I'm not coming at it like I am a agile manifesto or death. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of like, well, you keep using that word, but it doesn't mean what you think it means.
Inconceivable.
Right.
Inconceivable, right? And that's okay, but it's just making sure that I'm understanding so I can play by your baseball, because I know what baseball is because I've seen it, right? But if you're going to call this baseball, cool. And if you're going to call a home run getting to first base, cool. Now we're home runs, all the things, right? And it's perfectly fine. I just need to understand what rules you're operating under so I could participate as well. And one of the things that I love is that the first part of the Agile Manifesto, again, if you step back and look at it, is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. But if you don't have a Jira ticket,
right, if you don't have the tool to manage the thing you're doing, you're wrong.
Right. Or if there's no CI pipeline built, and I'm like, it's like, I think we're going backwards. Right. And again, I've seen every single aspect of it. I participated in a safe environment with the trains, and like, oh my gosh. And you have all these multiple trains and they all have to align. And it was like, yeah, it's like jumping out of a train and hoping you land on the car of the train that's going potentially faster than you on the rail that's next to you. It's like, that's not going to happen.
So you're saying Tom Cruise would be a good developer?
Tom Cruise would be the amazing developer, because it would probably be a chopper that comes down and picks him up and moves him around. So. And again, if I sound like the old man, I'm trying not to sound like the old man. We're having a really good conversation, and I'm just like, well, here's my unfiltered thoughts.
Well, and I think it's all to say, like, everything, you have to find what works too, right? Like,
totally.
I think what people are attracted to by the Agile, like Safe Agile, is it's so prescriptive that it doesn't leave room for interpretation for you to do it wrong, really, because it's so prescriptive. So it's like, well, we're doing Agile and we're not seeing results. It's like part of Agile is reevaluating and seeing what's wrong.
Right.
If you dictate from up high, here's what the rules are, I don't want to hear about it. Then when things don't work, like sometimes you don't have that feedback loop that you need to, like, all right, here's how we need to tweak it. Like, some teams love Kanban. Some teams would have a heart attack if you were just like, just pick up the top thing. It's like, but I need to know what I need to get done in a week. It's like, okay, but it's just it's a game, right? Of what makes you feel better. How are you the most productive? Let's go from there.
Right. My old manager, back when I had a full-time job, and you can look that up on LinkedIn where I used to work. So that's, because it's on the internet now, so everybody can look it up, right? Used to say, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And I say that because it was like, I joked that I had a field promotion. So when I got into management with a field promotion, where my manager was let go, and guess what? You're the manager now. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, is there any classes? Like, no, you're the manager now. Oh, well, I'm gonna, and that was the period of my life where I stopped reading technical books because I was technical enough, right? I can figure it out, the bits and the Googles and all those things out, right? But I was like, oh, how do I motivate people? Right? Because I was really afraid of you get promoted, the Pareto principle, you get promoted to level of your incompetence.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, now I get judged on what my teams accomplish. Let me focus on my teams, right? And let me empower the people that need empowering, and at the same time, not really push back or question, right? I'm like, okay, why are we doing it this way? You have to sell it to me first, right? Because we haven't had this conversation. And if you can't sell it to me, you can't sell it to the other person, to other teammate. So we need to have this conversation, right? Doesn't mean you're wrong. I mean, you got to sell it to me.
Right.
Right. Because that's the conversation. Like, again, interactions is the thing that makes it all possible. And more often than not, I was more of like, okay, great, let's go do it. But it's on you. It's on your shoulders. Not necessarily like, oh, if something happens, you're fired. It's like, no, you're leading this and I got your back. But I need to know information from you if we need to spend money, if there's something slipping or anything else like that. So I can communicate that and have those higher level conversations. But people really don't care that you're using service X on platform Y, right? They just care like, why are we a week behind? Or why that this thing costs more money, right? Because they're asking valid questions. And I just want to make sure I need to communicate that with them, because you're one project out of the 20 projects that I'm managing and dealing with all the people, right? And I think for me, it was like, all right, well, how did I want to be treated when I was the person doing the keyboard and doing all the work?
Right.
I just wanted to have that. I wanted to have that clear conversation. So I'm like, good, I'm going to have that with you all. And it would vary, the approach will vary depending on the individual, because you're dealing with individuals, right? And that's okay.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I had a stint in management for about a year, and it does drastically change where I was reading all those books, right? So when you level up in your technical career, it makes sense, right? From a a junior to a mid to a senior, because you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just doing this, but I'm sprinkling a little bit more of people in there, right? Or maybe I'm leading a technical effort.
Right.
When you go to people management, it's just like most companies, I would say, if not the vast majority, don't really give you like a crash course on people management.
No, they do not.
Maybe you got a promotion, like you said, because you were the most technical person in the room and they wanted to keep you, so they moved you up. You got a field promotion in your analogy, but they don't say like, here's people managing 101. It's like,
right.
No, you're just kind of left on your own, and hopefully you don't burn down the ship while you're doing it.
Oh, totally. And it's up to you how you want to take that challenge.
Yeah.
Right. You can take it from the perspective of like you. I'll pick on you, Alec, because I remember you and I talking about when you were doing more of that. It was like, oh yeah, I'm learning more about this and so forth. And it wasn't, you didn't view it as like, this just sucks or anything else. It was like, oh, okay, well, this is just like learning a new feature on Cloud X or Cloud Y or a new paradigm, right? And it's like, all right, I'm just going to go educate myself on it.
Yeah.
And then try it from then on.
I was just going to say, the interesting comment about like feeling like the promotion was like you get promoted to the level of incompetence. But what about like, so, I mean, you've had a really fantastic journey. You went from, developer to manager, but you also like spearheaded the .NET thing, the .NetConf, and like did a lot of technical speaking and such. So like, what about someone who's trying to do what you did? Like, what advice would you give them? Like, and they do want to become a manager, but they don't want to be seen as like you've lost your edge or whatever.
You lost your edge. It's funny. One of the things that I learned about with that was also servant leadership.
Okay.
Right. That has nothing to do with actual management. Because to me, management is more of like, do the numbers add up? I will approve your PTO because I have to make sure for this. I have to budget for X, budget for Y. So with servant leadership is more of the, what can I do as a leader, right? Management is the thing that I have to do because I have to fill out a form or I have to do those things. What can I do as a leader to enable you to be successful? So some people can attach to that approach, right? Some can't, and I don't mean that in like, okay, well, it's not like a sorting hat, right? It's like you can do it, you can't do it, right? It's more of like you will work your way into sort of that approach, right? But you also have to have sympathy for the people you're managing, because they are where you used to be, right? So I always used to joke with my teams and at my previous employer, and even people that I helped hire at my previous employer, and they're like, dude, you're spending your entire life in Excel and Outlook. And I'm like, yeah, so you could code, right? So you could do these things. I'm out here justifying all these things and making sure that I present them. So when I talk to our CFO, who knows absolutely nothing about technology, I could say, here's why we're spending this much money and these timelines to enable this business thing that we need to do. And I could help you understand those details. I can tell you the specific person that's working on that. And if we need to have a meeting, we need to have a meeting. But I want to have a conversation with that person first because I need to coach them, right? I need to coach them to be like, hey, you can geek out with me. We don't need to geek out with the suits. And I don't mean that the suits in a bad way, right? Like because it's going to be completely over the head, and they're it's like watching a movie is like, this is boring. Why am I paying attention to it, right? So you got to make it relatable to the people. So to me, I view it the same way as I'm pairing with someone to like, hey, let's refactor this code, right? Let's do these things, right? And it was one of those things that I always viewed it as I'm always paying it forward because of all the help that I received. So that, again, being that servant leader, right, to say, hey, let me walk with you in this 1 mile, right, rather than like, okay, walk me the mile and tell me how bad it sucked or didn't suck, right? Those are tasks, but more of like, what is the goal, what we're trying to get there. That's the one thing that I've always enjoyed, and I'm still solving a problem, right? I'm still solving. It's more of a biological problem rather than technological problem. Right? Because I need to figure out how I'm going to interact with Alec, for example, or with you. And the way I interact with both of you might be different. And then when the three of us come together, it's a totally different dynamic. Right? So to me, that was the fun part about it. I miss it at times. Right? I miss it because I don't, I as a consultant, as you both know, like you sometimes are there to get the job done and just get it done and move like quickly as possible. But if I build a partnership with a client, with a partner, right? It's like, then I'm just plus one, right? I'm always here. And hey, how are the kids? How is this? Blah, blah, blah. Because I really don't care about the work that we're doing. Well, I care, but you know what I mean? It's like, we know it's going to get done. We know we're this far in the sprint or this and that. It's like, that's a given. But more like, hey, I noticed you were a little apprehensive in the meeting, or someone tells me, hey, are you okay? You sounded a bit more emotional in that call. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I was just excited, right? Or I was frustrated or whatever, right? So that's, to me, anybody starting is the most important thing that you can learn to focus on, because you're always going to learn about Kubernetes via book, via good blog posts or bad blog posts, Docker, those things. And guess what? They're going to change. There's going to be a new Kubernetes. There's going to be a new Docker. There's going to be a new hotness that you're not going to know. And you're always going to buy a book or watch a podcast or learn about it. That's a given. But interacting with humans, you have to do it. You have to interact with humans, right? You could read books about like, oh, here's how you can do X, you can do Y. But it's only text until you actually put the wheels on the road, rubber on the road.
Right.
and you will have successes and you will have failures.
There's not going to be a new Kubernetes, by the way. We're stopping there.
Or as we Scott Sauber, we're talking about him earlier. Hey Scott, love you. As we call it, Kubernetes, right? Because it's its own little thing,
right?
And I like one of the books that long ago that I learned, and this is one of the managers said, because I was like, literally, I was like, wait a minute, this could be faster. And I tell this story I tell it to my kids now. Well, my oldest, because he's doing this stuff, and some people were new into it. Like I remember back at Iowa State, we went to a career fair. I think it was like spring semester career fair. Try to get something for the fall and whatever else. You all go through that. And I'm sitting there, and I walked up to the Microsoft table, because my dream has always been to work for Microsoft. Now I'm working with Microsoft, which is weird. Well, weird and cool, right? There's been times where like, hey, we would like for you to join us, and I'm like, well, it's not the right time. I always say that it's a matter of when, not a matter of if, right? For many of the things that I do. But I went and talked to them, and the gentleman that was doing the table was asking me, is like, a couple questions, like, hey, what about Cool? Cool was the code name for C#. It's like, oh, you know about Cool? It's like, yeah, I've heard about this and everything else. What about VV7? Because VV7 was VV.net. Right. All these things, like, oh, you know a lot of that stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's like, I just love this. I love programming. It's like, well, what's your favorite language? C++. I love C++. And it was like, oh, you do. So I had my resume, and he took my resume, and it was like, okay, great. Well, if you can answer this, I'll give you an interview.
Oh no.
And it was like, mic drop, right? You're going to do this. It's like, oh, this is, and back then that's the way it was, whether it's bro culture or not, whatever, it didn't matter. That's just the way things happen. And so I was like, oh yeah, oh cool. So he's sitting there, and he writes down 2 C++ statements.
Oh my God, this is the same story I have. Go for it.
So he writes 2 C++ statements, and it was like, okay, one of them is faster than the other. Which one is it, and why? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's this one, because it does it in 1 clock tick compared to this one, it does it 2 clock ticks. You are correct. Come on this day. And it was like, he thought he had me. Right? But it was like, what kind of nerd knows that thing takes 1 clock tick based when the compiler converts that into assembler compared to the other one that will take 2 clock ticks.
Right.
This nerd that literally learned C++ to that level because I cared about it that much, right? My people skills weren't as smooth as they could have been, but man, I was technical, right? And I say that because of going from that to where I am now was a journey, and I'm still in that journey, right? Even in the technical aspect of side of things. And that's the thing, is like, if you view it from that perspective, that you're always moving, you're always trying to make yourself better. And don't get me wrong, you could have 6 months, you could have a year, you could have 2 years where you're like, hey, you know what, I'm perfectly happy where I'm at, because I have to be a dad, I have to be a husband, I have things that are outside of me that prevent me from geeking on the thing that I want to geek on. Perfectly fine. I call that's your sabbatical. Right? That's your sabbatical from learning.
Wait, having kids is a sabbatical?
Well, sabbatical from all doing the things that you used to enjoy do with your free time.
Maybe technical learning sabbatical.
Let me just say, I never thought I would look forward to Monday mornings. Never. Until I had Saturday with kids at home. And I'm like, can I go back to work, please?
I need to get back to work, please, as soon as possible.
Love my kids, but
yeah. I mean, it is work, but it's like, again, but you had to learn it, right? It wasn't like, oh, by the way, Brian, here's your firstborn, here's the book of everything you'll need to learn, right?
Right.
Just follow the manual and it'll be fine.
Right.
It's like inheriting a legacy system at a company. You don't know what you're getting yourself into.
It's going to be a lot of long nights, a lot of things going wrong, a lot of hot fixes or hot patches going out.
I'm going to nickname one of my kids COBOL, and they're going to be like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm like, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. It's all good. Perfectly fine.
You're still making money.
Is that the one that never leaves the house?
I like that one. That's pretty good. That was pretty good. Yeah, it's a 60-year-old living in the basement. Literally, because that's where Kobo lives more often than where the mainframe's at, right? So
it's funny though, because I always joke about not wanting to be a basement coder, and I remember working at Wells Fargo way back in the day, and just being like looking at people that have been there for a long time, going, "That's never going to be me." And now that I'm getting older, I'm like, "What can I settle into for these last 10 years?"
It's so funny you say that, but I am literally the same way as you are. I was like, where do I want to retire?
Right.
In my career, right? It's like, I could be a CTO. I can be a CIO. I mean, I've run my own consulting business. I do this. I know what a P&L is. I know what this and that. So I could do that, right? And I can then make the environment better than what I've had in the past with that.
Yeah.
And that's my driving motivation. It's not because, oh, look at this. Look, I'm a CTO, I'm a CIO. And it's like, I just want to create that impact.
Yeah. So Microsoft has lots of positions for you then, right? Create a lot of impact, for sure.
They do. And I've had conversations with them about different things here and there. And it literally has been the timing.
Yeah.
It's always been the timing. Now that it's all remote, right? Or remote's allowed. It opened it made things a lot simpler. There were many times where more like, you'd be amazing for X. And we all think that, but you got to move here. And I'm like,
right.
Well, I have a 3-year-old.
And it's expensive to live in Seattle.
Yeah. Or I have a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old, right? Or whatever,
Yeah.
There were some local regional ones where I could have stayed in Des Moines and do the go to Kansas City, go to Minneapolis, do those things, but I would have been traveling a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, well, I'm local. At least I can spend a week at home. But it was like, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And my family's not going to remember me because of like, you were a great architect evangelist back when the word evangelism used to be, or a developer evangelist. Like, right. No, it's like, you were my dad and you were not here, whatever thing. And that's the way I always reasoned it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we never moved was because I couldn't make it work without my situation. Right. Where it was like, my in-laws are 10 minutes away.
Yeah.
So we had help for the kids and everything else. If I'm like, or my wife could go spend time with them and so forth. My parents were 2 hours away. I grew up with my my grandparents from my dad's side living in Houston. I was in Mexico. And that's a country, right? That's not like, oh, I'll see you this weekend, right? You can, but it's a thing, right?
Right.
And I wanted my kids to have their grandparents. So that's why I never did it. There are times where like, man, I could have been working for Microsoft for 20 plus years. Right. I could be retiring like in 10 years from Microsoft if I wanted to, right? Because I did have some of the opportunity to do it. But it was just like, but I couldn't, it did not make sense for us, not for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
So, but like I said, it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. Because just because
Microsoft recruiters are listening.
Microsoft recruiters are listening. Yeah.
He does. Okay, if there's anybody who doesn't need a Microsoft recruiter, it's Javi. Like, I mean.
So funny enough, one time I was applying for a job and I was denied the job because they said, you're too Microsoft for us.
Oh wow!
Like you're too red, you're too blue, you're too party line for that, and we don't want that. I'm like, okay, well then probably I don't want to work here.
Right.
I tell too much of the Kool-Aid.
I tell my trainees as they're facing right now, trying to get into the job market as boot camp graduates, essentially, I tell them rejection is protection. Rejection is protection.
Right. Totally.
So.
Totally.
It may not feel good, but there's reasons, right?
Yeah. And that's all good. I mean, you kind of have to find that one thing that works for you, right? And trying to make all sense out of it.
Yeah.
Because it's for you, right? And know that for you at this stage of life, right? And it's going to change as you move forward, and it's going to be something different, something a little more comfortable, a little bit less comfortable. But that's just a stepping stone onto the next thing.
Yeah,
for sure. I think it's an awesome way to wrap it. I don't know.
I was going to say, it's funny because we haven't yet to talk. We haven't done anything about Azure, which is cool. But we can definitely be more geeky about some.
We talked about Azure. We talked about the early days of Azure.
The
inside track of when it was called Atlas, you said, and all the services.
Red Dog.
Red Dog.
A Red Dog, and thank you for Alec for putting that there. That's literally the reason why I did not mention. I did not mention the origins of the name. But yeah.
Yeah, if you want to Google the name, I'd say go for it. Don't use company property if you're on a work computer listening to this podcast, maybe do.
Yeah.
I saw it on Wikipedia also, so that probably won't get flagged by your IT department. But
it's funny because like when the first time I heard about it, it wasn't through Wikipedia. It was through like people involved in the actually naming of it.
Jeez.
So I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
You heard it first.
That's a bit of trivia for later.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
So
do you have any?
I was going to say, if we want to talk more about Azure, we can definitely have a different conversation about it. We can talk about .NETConf and how we use Azure on that. There's a lot of cool things that we do behind the scenes that people think of like, oh my gosh, it's like, it could be massive. It's not. Like after doing it, .NETConf now, next year is our 15th year. We've learned a lot of different things that work and don't work. And not in Azure, just for us, right? So it's like, here's how we use these services to do X. So, well, we can definitely talk about that later. If you're looking for more content,
definitely get you on a part
we're going to
have
one where we stay on target and literally talk about .NETConf, how you use Azure, and just like where you see Azure going in the future and why.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Totally, that'd be a fun conversation.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely schedule that with you and get that on the books. But is there any last minute call outs or if people want to follow along with what you're doing or stay up to date with you?
So you can follow me on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle right there. I haven't tweeted much just because I've been busy with the holidays and, being dad and whatnot. But everything I try to put that's cool, I find I put it there. If you got questions, that's also my GitHub handle, so you can follow there. Just at me on Twitter. It's also, by the way, the same handle on Blue Sky. So because that's a thing now.
Yeah.
So if you want to reach out to me that way, that's awesome. And I think it's also my LinkedIn one, or my first link that last time at LinkedIn, if you want to reach out that way. So, nice. But yeah, I'm always here to help and lend out whatever assistance I might be able to do.
And by the way, I'm on a personal campaign to rename it to Twixter, and you're doing Twixts instead of tweets now.
Twix. Hey, I like that.
Yeah, Twixter. So anyway,
it's funny because like Elon is like, no, it's always going to be X. I'm like, oh, it's like the worst name ever. You're just walking away from all this brand that you had forever, and people don't care, but it's just like, this is dumb.
Yeah. Well, he seems to do things right somehow, figures it out and makes lots of money. So
that's true.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. And Javier, thanks for joining us. And we'll go ahead and
thank you for having me. And thank you for doing the rescheduling again. That was I really appreciated that.
Yeah. Would have rather Cyclones win there, but happy to accommodate and make things work.
I think half of AT&T and Stadium will be the same. They both, it was like we would have loved to have the W, but it wasn't in the cards that day.
Yeah. Still got a 10-win season for the first time ever. So I mean,
that's true. And we're going to a bowl.
Got him.
And we're going to a bowl game. So there's there's those things. So
and I don't know if you saw this, but both Hawkeye men's teams blew a 13-point lead after leading for 97 minutes of the total, or 97% of both games.
I was really worried about that because I was watching it last night and I was like, oh, come on. The first half was a bit stressful. And I say that because we went to the Marquette game a week before. And sorry for, talking sports ball here, but Marquette's a way better team than Iowa was. And we kept it on them and it was like, boom, boom, boom. And it was like, guys, what? It's been a week. Did we forget to play basketball in a week?
It's a rivalry.
What happened here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, too many emotions.
And I get it, right? I completely get it. But it was like these are worlds apart, and it's a way better team.
Yep. Right.
But it is what it is. I guess, awesome. Like you said, mindsets, it has nothing to do about can I make a 3-point. Is in my head, do I believe that I can make a 3-point? So.
Nice.
Awesome.
Cool. But again, gentlemen, thank you so much for having it. All you watching, thank you for putting up with my old man antics and rants that I do. And yeah, I'm sure I'll be back.
Awesome. We'll be happy to have you. Have a great weekend, guys.
Yep. See you, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.